British Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron has announced his country will be providing Ukraine with £3 billion of military assistance annually for as long as is necessary. He was speaking during a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Lord Cameron said it is up to Ukraine to decide how to use British weapons and insists it has a right to strike targets on Russian territory. The announcement comes after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak pledged to provide the UK's largest ever military support package for Ukraine during his visit to Poland in April. However, the Kremlin has condemned this move, saying it is a direct escalation of tension around the Ukraine conflict. Well, thousands of peace activists have taken to the streets of Salzburg in Austria, demanding an end to the fighting in Ukraine and cessation of Western arms shipments. Demonstrators marched through the Austrian city with flags and banners displaying white doves. Others were seen beating drums and shaking cowbells as police watched from the sidelines. According to local reports, at least 1,000 demonstrators from Germany, Austria, Liechtenstein and Switzerland joined the rally. Austria has backed EU-led sanctions in Russia in response to its military operation in Ukraine, but has refrained from sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. Politics now, this time in Britain. The opposition Labour Party has won a Blackpool South by-election, inflicting heavy losses on the governing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party. New Labour MP Chris Webb beat his Conservative rival David Jones with a significant swing of 26%. The Reform UK Party, founded by Brexit proponent Nigel Farage, came in third. The Northern Towns by-election was called in the wake of former Conservative MP Scott Benton's suspension from the party after he was caught offering to lobby on behalf of gambling investors for money. The Conservatives have lost more than 120 seats so far, including 6 in Hartlepool. In North East England, Labour's leader Keir Starmer described it as a seismic win, saying the result sends a message to Rishi Sunak and calls on the Prime Minister to make way. Let's discuss now with the VOA's Henry Widell. He joins us for more. Henry, great to see you. Voters went on to the polls yesterday in 107 towns and cities in England. What more can you tell us as regards this by-election? Henry, you do have to unmute your mic, though, so we can hear you. Oh, we do apologize, Henry. We have problems hearing you. We'll have to try to reconnect with you. Oh, I'm being told Henry's back with us. Henry, how do we understand this by-election, how it impacts on the greater part of Britain? We do apologize. We'll try to find out what exactly is wrong with the connection there and revisit this conversation. China, in the meantime, has launched an uncrewed lunar mission which aims to bring back samples from the far side of the moon for the first time in a potentially major step forward for the country's ambitious space program. The Change E7 probe, China's most complex robotic lunar mission to date, blasted off from Wenchang Space Launch Center at about 17:27 local time in China today. A country's National Space Administration said the launch was a success. The 53-day mission aims to bring around 2 kilograms of lunar samples to Earth for analysis. A launch marks the start of a mission that aims to be a key milestone in China's push to become a dominant space power, with plans to land astronauts on the moon by the year 2030, and of course to build a research base on its South Pole. Back on Earth, cleanup effort is underway in China following a major highway collapse in the city of Maizhou. This incident left at least 48 people dead. More than 577 relief workers, along with 80 rescue vehicles and equipment, are on the scene. Several vehicles are reportedly still buried deep under the dirt. The presence of rain, sliding gravel and unstable terrain on the slope has further complicated the ongoing search efforts. The incident follows a month of heavy rainfall in Guangdong province. Over 56 centimeters of rain has poured into the region over the past 4 weeks, more than 4 times as much as the same period last year. And to one of our lead stories today, the elections in Britain. Henry is back with us, and we hope the connection is a lot clearer. Henry, what more can you tell us about these by-elections?
Well, I think the voting picture for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives is hopefully a bit clearer than it was my audio earlier on. It's a bleak picture for the ruling party, the Conservatives, after yesterday's elections. There are still many results to come through, but the party has lost over 300 seats so far, and it has lost that key by-election you mentioned earlier in Blackpool South, which saw a 26% swing from the Conservatives to Labour. That's the third biggest swing in a particular parliamentary seat since the Second World War. And I think the key thing about that seat is that Blackpool was a city, a region that voted heavily for Brexit. That was, of course, at a time when perhaps the Conservative Party was at its strongest. It was obviously subsequently led after that by Boris Johnson, who maintained popularity in those districts. But since then, we've seen the Conservatives losing popularity, and the polls have shown they are a long way, up to 20% nationally, behind Labour. And I think these elections were a big test of whether those polls were correct. And by and large, they were. But it's not all a rosy picture for Labour. Now, while the Conservative vote does appear to be collapsing along the lines that were predicted, Labour's has stayed roughly the same. It's not seen the equivalent gain from the Conservative loss. The votes seem to be going to other smaller parties, including the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, and particularly to the Reform Party, which is really the latest manifestation of the Brexit Party. Before that, it was UKIP. That seems to be hoovering up a lot of the more sort of right-wing, pro-Brexit votes that were no longer going towards the Conservatives, who don't seem to be ready to trust Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and who are attracted to the agenda of the Reform Party, which wants a much harder break with Europe, much stronger controls on borders and immigration. There's still some very significant results to come, not least the Mayor of London, where the incumbent Sadiq Khan is up against the Conservative Susan Hall. We expect that result to come through at some point tomorrow.
So the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, may be reading the projections wrong when he says it was a seismic win, he believes. I believe this is for the Labour Party. And he says it's time for the Prime Minister to make way. Is he reading the numbers wrong?
I think he is responding particularly there to the result in Blackpool South. And of course, that matters because that is a parliamentary constituency vote. It was a by-election, as you described earlier on, forced by the resignation of Scott Benton, the Conservative councillor who was caught in a newspaper sting, allegedly offering votes for cash. So the Conservatives have claimed that the reason the vote went heavily against them there is because of that particular history, those particular circumstances. Now, if that kind of swing we saw in Blackpool South was repeated nationally in other Conservative-held seats across the country, then yes, it would be a landslide victory for Keir Starmer along the lines that we saw in 1997 under Tony Blair. But I think the picture is more mixed elsewhere. Labour have won a series of by-elections across the country. They do look to be in the driving seat towards gaining government from the Conservatives later this year. But these results are a bit more nuanced than that. There are some areas where the Conservatives have held on to seats, the Tees Valley being one of them. They've held on to the mayor there, so there is some lingering support for the Conservatives. There's also some sign in some particular areas, and this shouldn't be over-exaggerated, but in areas where there are large Muslim populations in Britain, there appears to be a reactionary vote against the Labour Party for their stance in what is perceived by some voters as supporting Israel in its actions against Hamas in Gaza. And so, for example, the Labour Party lost control of Oldham Council, local council, which is a high Muslim area there. So perhaps some similar phenomenon we're seeing in parts of the United States with a reported backlash against President Biden for the Democrats' policy on Israel as well. So while these local elections do concern local issues, we see some broader global issues coming into play as well. Last thing to say on this, one projection has come through from a particular analysis on Sky News, which suggests that despite the Labour gains, if these results were repeated in a general election, Labour would be the largest party, but they would fall short of an overall majority, therefore forcing them to seek a coalition government, probably with another party. So it is a positive night for Labour, but I don't think they can be complacent yet. And I think all parties, bar the Conservatives, will look for positives in what has happened over the past 24 hours.
Well, for those of us who are outside of Britain, it's a bit confusing trying to understand the by-elections and then understand how a prime minister is selected in Britain. And I think that Rishi Sunak's position is a bit shaky at the moment. Does he have any saves?
I think he is probably safe, but it depends a lot on those big results yet to come. There's a big decision for the Conservative Party. Britain has to have an election really by the beginning of next year, and most people expect it to be in November or December of this year. Do they get rid of their leader at this stage, which can be a sign of weakness in itself, bring in somebody new in the hope that within the next 7 months or so, that leader can turn their fortunes around? Bear in mind that it would very much likely be from the right wing of the party, because Rishi Sunak is very much seen as a centrist. And if he's seen as failing in these elections now, the party would likely try and pick somebody from the right. Perhaps someone like Kemi Badenoch is a very popular figure at the moment. I think the majority of the Conservatives feel at the moment that going down that route may cause more problems, may bring up old divisions within the party. There would be a leadership campaign. There would be all of those characters, including perhaps some well-known ones like Boris Johnson. Others might Liz Truss might wade into the debate as well. It might reveal the Conservative Party to be divided again and underline all those problems that many voters say they want to get rid of under the Tory party, those divisions, the 5 leaders we've had since the Brexit vote in 2016. Many voters, when you speak to them on the street, say they just want a bit of stability, not least economic stability. Whether another Tory leadership campaign could deliver that, I think many doubt that at the moment. But should the results get even worse, we might see, some kind of revolution within the Tory party and demands for a new leader before that general election.
Yeah, and we have been down this road several times before. Henry, thanks again. Good
to be with you.
Now, what was supposed to be a cheerful festival in Kyrgyzstan turned into tragedy when an ice cream truck drove through a crowd, there it is, injuring 29 children. The children were aged between 9 to 16. The country's health ministry said 18 of them were taken to several regional hospitals. 3 of them are in serious condition. The remaining 11 received first aid treatment at the scene and were sent home for outpatient treatment. Media reports say the driver left the truck on the slope without putting on the handbrake, causing the car to roll down the hill. A 48-year-old local man has been arrested over the incident. It was 20 years ago this week when 10 countries joined the European Union. And while at the time that wasn't the first expansion of the bloc, it might have been the most significant to date. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Malta, and Cyprus joined the bloc on May 1st, 2004. Romania and Bulgaria joined in 2007 in January, while Croatia became the newest EU member in July 2013. Meanwhile, Berlin's Brandenburg Gate lit up in blue and yellow as Germany celebrated 20 years of European Union expansion. Tourists and locals gathered to take photographs as a message reading 20 years together was projected on the iconic German landmark. Lars Halter is with Deutsche Welle. He joins me from Berlin. Lars, great to see you as always. Do take me back, if you will, to 2004 and tell me, why was the EU's eastern expansion such a big deal even back then?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, that was simply because of who joined the European Union back then. Because, you know, historically, the EU was a Western economic powerhouse. It was founded by Germany, France, Italy, and the Benelux countries, all, of course, NATO members, all Western allies. And now in 2004, the bloc took in a number of countries that until just a few years earlier had been members of the Warsaw Pact or were even Soviet republics like the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. There were the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Poland became a member then, as did Hungary, and that, of course, has given EU leaders some headaches ever since, for sure. Now, the addition of these countries to the EU was a strong signal towards the Eastern powers, mostly, of course, Moscow, that politics in Europe would look different in the future. It was a political game changer, but it was also an amazing business and economic opportunity for so many. With the expansion, previous EU members suddenly had new markets in the East, and they found it a lot easier to produce goods in regions there where labor was a lot cheaper.
And Lars, have these admissions to the EU caught up to their partners over the years?
Well, not entirely, but we can clearly say that those countries saw a boom for their respective economies. Many companies in those eastern countries quickly partnered up, forming joint ventures with Western companies to work for and sell goods to the West. Today, 2 decades now after that expansion, the economy in many of those eastern countries has really improved tremendously. There is more wealth, albeit they've not yet reached the level of Western economies in terms of wages or some other parameters. That's also reflected in the fact that all the countries who joined during that Eastern expansion are still net recipients. To date, that means every year they are getting more financial aid from the EU than they are contributing to the bloc. So for them, membership in the EU has been worth billions, most of which was actually spent on infrastructure improvements, but also on agriculture or education.
There's another country just waiting to join the EU, and that will be Ukraine. What's the current debate like regarding their membership and the possibility of that, Lars?
Well, it's a complicated situation. The EU and the Ukraine have long been talking. They've long had a free trade agreement, too. And yet membership in the EU is usually achieved in a decades-long process. While there was talk over that on and off, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested immediate admission under what he calls a new special procedure. Brussels has signaled that they would indeed be open to fast-tracking approval. And the latest now we heard is that Ukraine could be admitted as part of a class of countries that also would, for example, include some others that used to be Yugoslavia. Now, acceptance for Ukraine to join the EU is relatively high here within the bloc, but between politics and the economy, of course, there is a lot that has to be cleared up, and that's very tricky to do, especially right now at times of war.
Lars, thanks again for bringing us up to speed. Weather events across the world now. Several flights have been delayed and cancelled in and out of Dubai, the second busiest international airport in the world, while people and students instructed to work and study from home as heavy rains returned to the United Arab Emirates on Thursday. A storm comes just 2 weeks after record-setting rainfall triggered damaging floods in several parts of the country and neighboring Oman, which killed at least 4 people in the UAE. Floods also killed at least 19 others in Oman, including 10 children whose school bus was swept away in the deluge. The rain was not as heavy as the event 2 weeks ago, but Dubai experienced 20 millimeters in 12 hours, more than twice what it usually receives over the months of April and May combined. And in Brazil, a hydroelectric dam has collapsed in the southern part of the country following days of heavy rains that triggered massive flooding. The disaster left more than 30 people dead, 60 others still missing in the city of Rio Grande do Sul. About 15,000 residents have fled their homes since Saturday. At least 500,000 more are without power and clean water across the state. A burst dam triggered a 2-meter wave, causing panic and further damage in the already flooded areas. A skip over to East Africa, where Kenya and Tanzania are bracing for a cyclone coming on the heels of torrential rains and floods that have devastated the region, killing nearly 400 people, forcing tens of thousands from their homes as well. Cyclone Hidaya is inching closer to the eastern coast of Tanzania with an expected landfall later today, according to the latest weather forecast. It's also likely to bring more rain to neighboring Kenya, including the major coastal city of Mombasa, just north of the eye of the cyclone. Floods in Kenya have already claimed at least 210 lives since March, according to updated tolls from the Ministry of Interior and National Administration on Friday. It said 125 people have been injured, 90 more missing. 165,500 people are displaced. In Tanzania, at least 155 people have been killed in flooding and landslides in recent days. With the arrival of Hidaya, there are more fears of weather disruption. So the state of Florida has recently joined other states in the U.S. that have placed a ban on reproductive rights. Florida lawmakers anticipate this ban will decrease the access to quality health care for many residents of Florida, as doctors will be limited in care options, and some may decide to practice other states in the U.S. that have not banned human rights. Our Washington correspondent spoke with the Florida Senator, Lori Berman, on the issue.
Senator Bierman, we thank you so much. As we know, it's a very interesting time in American history, especially as we're in the midst of elections and reproduction rights are at the center of conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important right now to be discussing reproduction rights? What is really the drive behind it and how this is impacting Americans as a whole?
So, as we all know, several years ago, Roe v. Wade was overturned. And Roe v. Wade was a law in the United States for 50 years. And it said that a woman could have an abortion up to the time of viability. And it left the decision very much between a woman and her doctor. And that's where the decision should always be. Unfortunately, once Roe v. Wade was overturned by the new conservative Supreme Court justices, what happened is they left it up to the states, and each state has taken a different position. And many of the more conservative states and the red states have really limited abortion. And today, Florida is joining that group, unfortunately. And Florida, as of midnight tonight, will have a 6-week abortion ban. And we all know that a 6-week abortion ban is a virtual ban. Most people don't know that they're even pregnant at 6 weeks. And that's 6 weeks from your last period. So it's really a 4-week abortion ban because you probably aren't getting pregnant until 2 weeks into your last period. So it's really taking away women's rights to make their determination about when and how they want to have children. And what's also happening is it's also affecting wanted pregnancies where you have issues that are of fetal abnormalities, where you have issues where the mother's life is at risk because of the child, and we're taking that away from people. We're saying, you know, sorry, you're going to have to carry this child to term, even if you know that the child is going to die shortly thereafter. We've seen situations like that. And we've seen situations even in Florida with a 15-week abortion ban, where people would go to the hospital with problems and the doctors would say to them, you need to go home now and just wait till you get sicker. We want you to almost be dead before we're going to do anything to help you. It's really an issue of people's lives and people's ability to get health care. That's what we're really seeing here, is a denial of health care. Reproductive rights are health care. Abortion is health care. And if we can't treat people for that, it's going to be a real problem. And you know what we've seen also is maternal mortality rates are higher in the states that have the really restrictive abortion bans. And Florida's going to join that list, unfortunately, along with many other states in the country.
Talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned maternal mortality rates being higher because of healthcare challenges, especially for women that are having complications with their pregnancy. Tell us, what are we seeing across the country for states that are putting bans on reproductive rights?
I mean, we're seeing, unfortunately, women getting really sick. You know, unfortunately, we're probably going to see some people die. I mean, that's going to be the end result. And we're seeing people also who are losing their ability to have another child. If they had been treated properly, it wouldn't have affected them. But a lot of times, because they're made to wait, it affects their ability to even have another child. And the other thing that we're seeing in those states, unfortunately, is that doctors don't want to be there. And we're going to start to see a real shortage of OBGYN doctors in states that have these really restrictive laws, because we don't know what's going to happen when those, you know, laws go into effect. And doctors don't want to be arrested. I mean, that's the bottom line in a lot of these states. Doctors can be jailed for performing abortions, and we don't know where that line is. There's no clear line for doctors that says, okay, now you're allowed to do an abortion, now you're not allowed, you know, other than the 6-week ban is an absolute clear line. But what if the woman's life is at stake? What if her ability to have other children is at stake? Can the doctor do the abortion? And you're going to see doctors leaving the state, and it's going to affect all the people in the state, because even someone who's not pregnant wants to be able to get gynecological care, and they're not going to be able to, because
Florida Senator Lori Berman speaking with our correspondent Maria Bird. Finally on the program now, the 33rd Abu Dhabi International Book Fair 2024 has kicked off at the Abu Dhabi National Exhibition Center, bringing together esteemed Arab and international writers and thinkers. This year's theme is tagged "Where the World's Tales Unfold." The event, organized by the Abu Dhabi Arabic Language Center, will run until May 5. With 1,350 publishers hailing from 90 countries, this year's edition boasts participation from 12 countries making their debut, such as Greece, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Mozambique, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Indonesia. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.